Good morning, sex educators.
Good morning.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a great conference, hasn't it? I mean, the speakers have been amazing, the keynotes, the workshop facilitators in the workshops I've attended have been great. And I have to say, for me as a Black sex educator, it has been so gratifying to see so many people of color in different kinds of positions here, as a conference co-chair, keynoters, workshop leaders, lots and lots of participants, and it makes me happy because for a lot of my career, I have been either the only person of color or one of a handful. So this is really great. And then the other thing is just the talent in this, not just this room, but at this whole conference. As you all have gotten up and introduced yourselves and talked about the work that you're doing, I mean, my mind has been blown because you all are doing some fantastic things. So it makes me absolutely optimistic about the future of sex ed, So you all are at different points on your career paths. Some of you are at or near the beginning of your career. Some of you are in that wonderful middle ground. And others of you are like me, looking back or looking in the rearview mirror at the bulk of your career. That's where I am. So you've gotten the sense from the title of my talk. This is a memoir. So you guys are going to go down memory lane with me, and I'm going to use my career as a lens to talk about sex education through the life cycle, and I'm going to focus on a couple of things. One is I'm going to have you look at the work that I've done with folks at some of the various places along the life cycle, and then I'm going to weave in like a look at the personal impact that work has had on me. Because there have been some times when it has really led to profound personal growth, and there have been other times when it's made me confront a personal barrier or something that I had to overcome. So I'm going to ask you all, on a few different occasions to turn to someone sitting next to you to answer a reflection question so that you can ponder whether you've had possible parallels in your life. Okay, so how did I get into the field? Pam in the 70s, 1974 with the afro. Okay, I was in my second year of graduate school at Catholic University in the School of Social Work, and I got this assignment to get involved with a community organization of my choice. Now, I chose Planned Parenthood because I had walked past this building in Southeast Washington, D.C. that housed a Planned Parenthood clinic almost every day of my adolescence, going to the bus stop to go to high school. And I always saw the sign. And then when I was in college, I had gone to the Planned Parenthood to get birth control, and I had a really good experience there. So I said, I'm going to pick Planned Parenthood. So this is not how that building looked, but it was the only picture I could find online. Okay, so I didn't know at the time that this particular Planned Parenthood was in a way historic because it had been founded by this Black social worker in Washington, D.C., in this area, Parklands. She worked with Black families and lots of young moms with a lot of children that they really couldn't take care of. And she said, I want to be able to give them options. I'd like for them to know that they could limit the number of children they have. So she got together with Planned Parenthood. It was a longer story than this, but they gave her a grant and she founded a clinic. So I go in and I meet the clinic director, a wonderful Black woman, and then this other woman was an educator from the main office downtown, main clinic. Her name was Joan Benish. And she was just someone who loved to get the ball rolling, create opportunities for people. So she took a look at me, this graduate student, and she said, she could be really helpful to us. And she said, oh yeah, come on in, we're gonna get you involved in educating teens and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like a little nervous, but she said, we're gonna give you training. So they did, they gave me training, and then before I knew it, I'm sitting in front of a group of teenagers trying to teach them about birth control. And you know what I had to do to teach them about birth control, right? I had to talk about sex, I had to say penis, vagina, intercourse. I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I was really, really, really uncomfortable. And it was almost like I had a sign on my forehead. Unaskable, right? Now, how did I become unaskable? Because I grew up in the Wilson family. This is my little brother Ricky, my older brother Michael, and we had a great, warm, loving family raised by my mother and father, big extended family. But when it came to sex, my mom was puritanical, uptight. When it came to her body, she was closed off. This is a woman who slept in her bra and underpants under her nightgown every night. And I just had this sense of like ick, yuck about the body. And of course, she passed that on down to me, So as a teen and young adult, I had my bra and underpants on. The idea of the body, my naked body against even a nightgown was like not comfortable. Then she was also judgmental. The word nasty, the word slut and whore came out of her mouth with regularity. If she was watching a soap opera and one of those women was seeming sexual and like she enjoyed it, oh, slut. My mother would call her a slut. And the interesting thing is, my mother's message to me was, Pam, there are two kinds of women in the world. There are good and proper women, like I want you to be. She didn't tell me this directly, but I picked it up. Who wait until they get married to have sex. But here's the thing. Even when they wait to have sex with a husband, if they enjoy sex, they take that slippery slide down to being a slut or a whore. So a woman never enjoys sex. That was a real powerful message, right? It's like the whole idea of sexual arousal and all that just like filled me with a sense of shame. And you guys know shame is like a very intense negative emotion that's heavy and it's hard to shake off, right? So that don't be a slut message, I say it was like on my shoulder in lots of situations, right? With a partner, it was on my shoulder in that Planned Parenthood when I was trying to talk to those teens about birth control, right? So good news. At Planned Parenthood, I got a lot of great training. How many of you all have ever worked for Planned Parenthood? Okay. I think at least back in the day, it was the way a lot of us started, right? So I got great training. I mean, the wonderful thing is there were lots of real dynamic educators, and I got to see them being so comfortable. I got to co-facilitate with them. I got to attend, got into the Sex Ed Coalition, and I got to attend trainings there. I had one of the most wonderful training experiences. I got to go to a SAR, a Sexual Attitude Reassessment workshop at the Kinsey Institute, paid for by Planned Parenthood. So it was fabulous, right? So when I graduated and got my MSW, I went to work for Planned Parenthood. So all of this was going on then, right? But so I would say that I was enlightened. And the interesting thing is, with that enlightenment came like a shift in my whole approach to sexuality. It's like it really began to kind of knock my mom off my shoulder. When I got the slut, I had like something countering it because I had heard so many affirming and positive messages about the true nature of sexuality. And I really came to understand that, sexuality is not nasty. Sex is not nasty. It is definitely, a very positive aspect of being human. One day I was telling the my supervisor at Planned Parenthood, I said, when I first started doing this work, these teens were not very outgoing and not very talkative. Now, oh my gosh, they come to me with all of this. They're so open. I said, they have changed so much. And she looked at me and said, Pam, they haven't changed. She said, you have changed. So I was askable. Now it's your turn. I want you, and if you're not, you got somebody right behind you. Find a person that you got somebody right behind you or right beside you. I want you to find somebody you can talk to. You're going to have 3 minutes. And what I want you to talk about is, how did you get into the field of sex ed, and how did that impact you as a sexual person? Okay? How did it impact you as a sexual person? I'm going to stop you. I really, really hope that you got around to the second part of that question and talked about how it impacted you as a sexual person. We're not going to process in the large group. We don't have time. But, these discussions are really, really helpful. I know we ask people to reflect on their sexuality a lot in training, because it's just really important in helping us really be in touch with who we are. And we have to know who we are before we work with other people. So I'm going to move on. And I know everybody agrees with this statement. Sexuality is more than sexual behavior. It's an aspect of who we are. And it begins at birth or before, and it ends at death, right? So it's with us throughout that whole lifespan. So isn't it appropriate that we would offer sexuality education to people along all of those ages and stages, right? So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about these age groups: parents, young children, upper elementary age, teens. That's the group I started with first. How many of you started working first with teens? Adults. And among adults, I did a lot of work with specifically low-income fathers and low-income couples. I'm going to touch on my work with them. And then now, older adults. So I stayed with Planned Parenthood for 1 year, and I left because I had invested 2 years getting my MSW. Now, the job I had at Planned Parenthood did not require that degree, and I was beginning to feel like, I need a somewhat higher salary, And I loved Planned Parenthood, so I kept working as a volunteer. But I found another job. And I went to work for the DC Health Center for Mothers and Children. And it was in a low-income, a lot of my work has been with low-income populations. It was in a low-income neighborhood in DC. And the good news for me is, because I still was so interested in sex ed, the person who was my supervisor was a woman named Jane Quinn. That was how she looked back then. This is how she looks now. So Jane was a big believer in sex ed. We had some very young teens come into our clinic pregnant. And the group of social workers was convinced we need to be doing prevention. And we said, we want to start young. So we went to the elementary schools in our area and proposed doing a sex education program with them in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grades with their students. Do you know they welcomed us with open arms? It was not controversial. We certainly had to explain and show them what we were going to do and all of that, but they welcomed us. And I loved this age group. How many of you have worked with this age group? Oh my God, the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. They were so open and, just little sponges. Just, yes, ask me. I'm not too cool. I'm going to ask you everything, right? And it was so interesting because in the beginning of the program, they were giggly and, I did hear that word nasty. And you know how that bothered me, right? So this is what some of the attitudes they've grown up with, right? I loved watching them over the 6 weeks because you would see them get comfortable with the topic, started modeling the language I was using, and I was taking every opportunity I had to instill some positive attitudes, about the body, about just the naturalness of sexuality. So another fun thing that happened in this program was we were 3 female social workers, 3 women. We wanted to get more facilitators. We wanted to get some men. We wanted just to get more. We needed more facilitators. We were able to go to the Howard University Medical School and create a program with them where we got credit for those students to come and co-facilitate these sessions with us. So I became an adjunct faculty person, went to Howard Medical School, trained the medical students, not in the facts, but in the process. How do you talk to younger children about sexuality? How do you answer their questions? And then they would come co-facilitate with us and we'd have a debriefing session after. So, interesting research. There was some research done with those students after they became doctors. They were quite likely to be bringing up sexuality issues with their patients. So I think we need to think about that. When you give medical students real hands-on experiences talking about sexuality, it stays with them, right? So that was very cool. Now, my buddy Jane hooked me up with an amazing training experience. You all are going to be so jealous. Because Jane recommended me, I got accepted for the social work program for the study of sexuality. I went in 1977. It was 1 month at the University of Hawaii. All expenses paid, stipend. I mean, it was amazing. It was like a month-long SAR in a way because I got exposed to so many different aspects of sexuality, and our group was small, like 10 to 12 people. So we would come back and we'd learn about something, we'd come back and process it for a month. I mean, it was amazing. The guy who directed it was Dr. Harvey Gocross, and it was in one of Harvey's lectures that I first learned about this whole framework of sexual beingness. This was in 1977, or the circles of sexuality. That's when I learned about them. And I was like, wow, this is so great. And so when I came home, every training I did, and as I would write curricula, those circles of sexuality went in. So it was like a real guidepost in my, that I learned there. Now, we were supposed to be learning how to design and implement courses in human sexuality in graduate schools of social work. Here's the great thing. Oh, this is us on the beach, okay? So hanging out, that's me, of course, in the white jacket, but it was very cool. I got to go back to my alma mater and teach a 1-credit course in human sexuality. And I did it from 1978 to 1990. And the wonderful thing is, because I was a social worker who was out there really doing sex ed, I wanted to make sure that these students were getting like all the practicalities. I didn't want it to just be theoretical. I wanted them to understand how they could bring up sexuality issues in counseling using the PLICIT model, right? I wanted them to understand how they could be doing sexuality education. So it's real practical. Another amazing thing, I included a mini SAR in my course at Catholic University. And they knew I was doing it. Another fun thing, when I got tired, when I was ready to move on, I said, Wayne, do you want to do this? And so Wayne took up the mantle. How many years did you do it, Wayne? 9 years, okay. So then, after one other job, I got this I got this job at a place called Math Tech. How many of you have ever heard of Math Tech or those early evaluations of sex education? Okay, so this is a little history for you guys, right? So in the early 80s, the Centers for Disease Control wanted to find out about the effectiveness of sex education. Now, of course, they wanted to know what? Does it prevent pregnancy? Does it prevent STDs? So again, here's my buddy, Joan Bennett, you know, the woman from Planned Parenthood. Well, I told you, she always tried to put people together. So we were hearing at the Sex Ed Coalition that this company, Math Tech, had a social science group that was going to be evaluating sex ed. And they wanted to hire like a sex educator. They were all like PhD evaluators. They wanted to hire a sex educator just to have like a little dose of reality as they were doing their research. So Joan said, oh, I know somebody you should talk to. You know, why don't you talk to Pam Wilson? So Doug and I got together and we clicked, and he ended up hiring me for the job. Oh my gosh. Say it again? Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you, Bernice. How many of you have ever heard of Doug Kirby? Okay, well, those of you who haven't heard of Doug Kirby, well, I'll tell you the story and I'll bring you up to date. Okay, so Doug Kirby at the time was the director of this social sciences group. I'll just like show you this was our group at the time, kind of hanging out like one evening. We worked hard. This is another guy who was really well known in the field, Peter Scales, over there on the right. Here we go. We do the evaluations, you know, and I finally got like to get a sense of what was going on in sex ed around the country, not just locally in the Washington metropolitan area, because we were evaluating what we called exemplary programs. So what people considered to be, you know, like the best program. So I meant, how many of you know Connie McCaffrey? So Connie's program was one that got evaluated. Another really famous sex educator, Mary Lee Tatum. So it was great exposure for me. Now, the results, what did we find out? We were studying parent sex ed and sex ed for teens. So for parents, we found out that, what you all already know, parents, they need help, they need support to educate their children. And this is what they told us in needs assessments. The results of the evaluations, the programs that were happening at that time were somewhat successful. Yes, they could increase knowledge, and they had a moderate impact on communication. But look at this rain cloud. Not good news for the evaluation of the programs for teens. What we found out was, based on this research, the programs did not impact behavior. They did not lead to an increase in use of birth control. They did not lead to an increase of use of protection against STDs. They did not lead to an increase in communication skills. One little glimmer of some bright light, they didn't encourage kids to have sex, because that was what people thought, right? Oh, sex ed is going to make them all want to go out and have sex. Definitely had proof that that didn't happen. Well, how do you think I felt at the end of this? I was their sex educator on the team. I was devastated. You know, I'm like, what are you talking about? Because how many of you all have done sex ed and you look at the group over time? Don't you see change happening? I mean, I was like, wait a minute, this evaluation just did not capture the change. You know, I'm sorry. It does happen. So, but you know, what it showed was it didn't have an impact. Well, what it did for me was it pushed me, like I started feeling like I don't want sex ed to have to bear the burden of being responsible for reducing pregnancy and STDs as if that's the only reason why we would have sex ed. I said, for me, if we didn't even have an issue with that, I would still want sex ed because I want people to grow up to be sexually healthy. So I just really I started, you know, really preaching that and advocating that. Doug went in the other direction, and we remained close. But his feeling was, no, we have to figure out what we need to do in programs to lead to behavior change. So he made that his life's work, and so he created a lot. I mean, he helped to cull and pull together a lot of the information that has led to the evidence-based programs. Doug, I have to go back and look at him. Doug, unfortunately, in 2012, died doing something that he loved, mountain climbing. And one of his last sentences was, "Isn't life great?" as he looked out at the mountain. And then, he had a heart attack. But he really contributed to our field. So let me go on. Okay, when I left Math Tech, I was on my own out there as an independent consultant because we did not bring in enough money. You know how we were a consulting firm, so you had to write proposals and get contracts to pay for your personnel. We were doing it, but we didn't bring in enough money. So Mathematica, our parent organization, said, "See you guys, you all have to go." The good news for me was when I left, I had a 3-year contract for 50% of my time. Now, it was with Gallaudet University. I was supposed to be helping them develop sex ed programs for parents of deaf students. And they really wanted me to work on the projects. They said, are you gonna do it? Are you gonna be a consultant, or are you gonna go find a job? And I decided I'm gonna be a consultant, okay? So that was in 1983. And one of my first, in the next couple of years, I did a very interesting project with this organization called the American Association for Counseling and Development, AACD. They're now the American Counseling Association. But it was a parent-child program. Families talk about sexuality. So it was parents and their children ages 9 to 11. And that is like an ideal time to like recruit parents and kids, because parents of that age child, puberty age, right? They know they need help, right? They know, okay, there's a lot of change happening with my child. I need to prepare my child. I need help. So that's why we chose that age group. So we trained 100, and I say we because I did it with my colleague, Carol Hunter-Gaboy. And Carol and I ended up doing a lot of work together because she went out on her own as a consultant too. We trained 111 counselors and then left the project with 20 trainers so they could keep on going. Now, another time for reflection. At Math Tech, I had only been evaluating parent sex education programs. When I started doing Families Talk About Sexuality, I started really working with parents. Now, I was single, no kids, and I started feeling like, uh-oh. As I got closer to going into that first group, I was like, woo. And, are these parents going to respect me, or are they going to feel like, what the heck do you have to tell me about, raising children? You're not a parent. I mean, I got very, very nervous. And so right before the first group, I started figuring out how can I introduce myself so I can kind of like fudge the fact, that I'm not a parent. Maybe they won't find out. Well, of course they found out, right? It was just awkward. It took me figuring out, you know what, Pam? You don't have to be a parent. You just need to know what you bring and what you don't bring. So I started figuring out, I have worked with so many kids like their kids. And I've heard their questions, I've answered their questions. So I've heard stuff maybe that they haven't heard. And I have some facts and I have some skills I can give you. And guess what? I'm not an expert. It's not my job to tell you. I'm a facilitator. I can help you all learn from each other. When I got clear on that, and I realized I just need to be transparent, I need to go right in there and tell them who I am, what I'm going to bring, period. Once I did that, it became a non-issue, right? So, what I want to ask you guys, imposter syndrome, that's what I was feeling, right? Discuss a time when you were anxious or insecure about educating a particular population, or maybe it was just taking on a new skill, but when you felt like an imposter. I want you to discuss that situation and how you overcame it. Okay, so you got 3 minutes again, so go.
Have you got that?
probably most of us have felt like imposters at some point in our career, right? So I want to move on and talk about one of my next contracts that really was important for me. And again, you know, it's mentor. You all are hearing me talk about these mentors. Jane Quinn again. Jane had left the clinic and she went to Girls Clubs of America and became their national director of programs. And she, of course, had all this rich sexuality education background. She said, wow, Girls Clubs of America needs to be doing more on sex ed. And, oh, by the way, Pam, you're now a consultant. Why don't you come and work with us? So I started going around and doing 3-day trainings in Girls Club affiliates around the country. And then in 1990, Girls Clubs became Girls Incorporated. Woo-hoo! Boys Clubs decided they were going to be Boys and Girls Clubs. And they gave Girls Clubs a pot of money to take that part of the name. And I think it was probably the best thing that could have happened to Girls Clubs, because Girls Incorporated, I loved inspiring all girls to be strong, smart, and bold. I had 2 nieces at the time, and I still have them, but they were little girls. Oh, wow, they got a heavy dose of growing up to be strong, smart, and bold. So in 1985, did I say, no, wait, yeah, it was 1990 when you guys became Girls Incorporated, right? Yeah, okay. So in 1985, though, Girls Clubs got a grant to evaluate pregnancy programs. Now, of course, that's where the money was, right? Because I think Girls Clubs' philosophy is sexuality education. But of course, the money was for preventing adolescent pregnancy. So they, you know, we infused sex ed into it. But so we put together this very comprehensive program. They hired me to develop the program, along with, of course, their local and national staff representatives. And it was a 4-pronged program, you know, bringing kind of the best of what we knew: a parent-daughter program, adult-daughter, like an assertiveness kind of abstinence-based component, willpower, won't power, taking care of business for 15 to 18-year-olds, and Health Bridge, making sure that girls were connected to health services, right? So very comprehensive. What we learned was dosage is important. Those girls who only went to a couple of sessions of any of those programs were not impacted as much as those who went to more of the program. You guys know that. Dosage is important. Start early and stay late. Those girls who were involved in growing together, willpower, won't power, and taking care of business, there was more impact for them, right? So the more comprehensive, the better. And is Karen in here? I'm here. So Karen is now the person who has taken preventing adolescent pregnancy on to the next level, right? So that's exciting. So now I want to talk to you all. There are a lot of pictures here. This was another big part of my experience. This, for so many years, they started before then. That's when I joined the staff. But there was this annual workshop on human sexuality at Thornfield, a week-long training, right? And a week-long SAR, right? So the point of Thornfield was not, you're coming to learn how to be a sex educator. You're coming to get all of these skills. No, the point of Thornfield was, you're coming to work on you. You're coming to really examine your attitudes, values, and feelings to figure out where you stand on all of these aspects of sexuality. Everything from body image, masturbation, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, aging. I mean, you know, every aspect. We would present something, sometimes explicit visuals, sometimes a presentation, whatever it was, right? And then you'd go back to a small group and talk about it. But the whole point was working on you. I'm telling you, a week of doing that is a deep and powerful experience. It's very different than going somewhere for 3 days or something like that. And I have to tell you that what I saw happen at Thornfield was pretty magical, because I think the staff did a really nice job of creating safe space, because for that kind of week-long SAR, it has to be safe, right? And the other thing was we had the magic of Thornfield, this retreat center on Lake Cazenovia. Very serene, beautiful, lots of woods. I mean, it was just like the perfect spot, right? So we started feeling toward the end of the Thornfield experience like it was holy ground, right? It really started to feel like that. And I can tell you that at the end of the Thornfield experience, we would have everybody sit around in a circle and we would talk about re-entry. Because after a week at Thornfield where people just got vulnerable, they would really just talk about stuff and openly share things. And now we were sending them back to the real world. So we had to really prepare them, everybody hasn't been doing what you've been doing for the last week, so you really have to take it slow. But it was powerful. And I can just even remember the faces of people sitting around in circles. When you get done with a moving experience, you can see that people are full and they're leaving with this fullness. But I would also see that people were lighter because they were leaving some stuff behind at Thornfield. So I just can't tell you, I wish we still had that kind of training in our field, like a week long of really working on you. These pictures, you probably know some of these people. Brian McNaught is like one of my heroes. He's really been a mentor. He wrote this book, Sex Camp, which is great. If you didn't come to Thornfield, you can kind of have the experience. This is that sex educator, beloved Mary Lee Tatum, who's been a real mentor to me. This is like one of the whole groups. You can just see kind of what a typical group was. Do you all recognize this woman? That's Mary Jo. Yeah. Bill Staten. Yeah. So anyway, it had a huge impact on me, and thanks for letting me share that. Okay. So real quick, and I need to move faster, another population, young children. Babies and young children are sexual beings. We know that, but out in the world, people have a problem with that, right? Because they feel like these little ones are too young. We are going to be taking away their innocence. We're going to be encouraging them to go out and have sex and masturbate, and it's just really, really scary. There have been a couple of, in my book, When Sex is the Subject, Attitudes and Answers for Young Children, I talk about this one concept that I do think is important, and that is the whole idea of the fact that we as adults, when we think about sexuality, we think about it in our adult perspective, right? We have our adult glasses on. So when we see little kids, doing normative behaviors, such as exploring each other's bodies, sex, play, playing doctor or whatever, or they ask a question, a lot of times we see it or hear it through our adult glasses, right? But you have to remember, they're children. They're not experiencing it in the same way. It's often curiosity, exploration, mimicry, all of that, right? So we have to take off our adult glasses and see things from the child's perspective, right? We have to take those glasses off. So we have to, really understand childhood sexuality. There are a couple different programs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. The Alexandria City Public Schools did a fabulous job with a K through 12 program. They actually provided their elementary school teachers with 2 graduate 3-credit courses at the University of Virginia to prepare them to teach what they called family life education. Can you believe that? 2 graduate courses. And I was fortunate enough to teach one of the courses, which was the methods course, which is like, how do you really teach? And Mary Lee Tatum taught the human sexuality course. Their program went great. I'm telling you, they started senior high, middle school, and then when they got to elementary, they mandated that all of their teachers take the training, but then they could opt out after the training. Guess where they experienced their first moment of controversy with what age group? It was elementary, but it was K-3. And of course, the parents felt like, oh, you're going to be teaching them about contraception. I mean, people have such a misguided idea about what you're going to teach. But they did a really nice job with community advisory groups and all that. So they had outspoken support. Once the parents at parent orientation saw what we were really going to be teaching, they calmed down. So their program did not experience controversy. On the other hand, Susie Wilson just recently reminded me that I had worked with her on another early family life program. It was a great program with a big book that, remember that? Yeah. Where teachers would use it like in like a reading circle kind of situation, like, K through 3. The parents went bonkers. She said it was like the most volatile experience she'd ever seen. She said it was palpable, the anxiety. And in fact, Rutgers University Press eventually pulled the program. Susie said it was like one of the biggest, just disasters that she had to witness, one of the biggest losses. She said that still stays with her. That's me and Susie. So I want to move on and talk about this project really impacted me. In the 90s, I had done a lot of work with this organization, Public-Private Ventures. They were like a national intermediary research firm that often helped folks develop a program and then kind of roll it out to the nation. And they had this young, not my language, young unwed fathers pilot project. And they knew me to be a curriculum developer who would develop interactive, engaging kinds of activities and sessions. So they wanted me to write a fatherhood curriculum. Long story short, I told them no at first, but I ended up doing it with a guy, a man. And we ended up writing this fatherhood development curriculum. But I learned something during that project, and that was, I'm a social worker. How many are social workers in this group? Okay. So we get trained to be non-judgmental, right? And I really thought I was non-judgmental. When I started working with these men, because I knew I had a lot to learn, so we were going around to all the sites. It was 6 sites. And I was meeting with the young fathers, meeting with the practitioners, hearing like their stories and really seeing they wanted to be involved in their children's lives. They didn't fit the stereotypes, and I really hadn't heard their perspective. I didn't realize that I was kind of like slanted. I'm a woman. I'd been working, Girls Incorporated. I'd been working with them on behalf of girls and young women. I really don't think I fully had, the young father's perspective. So I needed to like right myself a little. And then on top of that, I realized that I had some real biases, because I'm going back to my mom, who if I could bring her back, I would bring her back. I'd wiggle my nose and get my mom back in a hot second, right? But my father was a workaholic because he grew up poor, and he wanted us to have more than he had, so he was working all the time. My mom was very angry that he was not home more. So I heard a lot of, your father, just complaining about my father. It's like, you can't count on a man, and men will let you down, and men are no good, they mess up. I mean, I heard a lot of that, and it wasn't just from her, it was from other women in my life. And then on top of that, my own experience with my dad was, because, he was very loving. He would say, oh, we're gonna go to this amusement park, we're gonna do that. And when the day came, so many times we didn't go. So Dad made a lot of promises that he didn't keep. So I'm now this, how old was I then? Oh, probably in my 30s. Anyway, I came face to face with, when I met men, I met them with a negative expectation. I met them with this kind of belief of, so when are you gonna mess up? Or when are you gonna let me down? I mean, it wasn't right there, but it was somewhere under the surface that I had this negative expectation. So it was only when I was, like reflecting on my relationships with men and my relationships with my own father that I realized that bias. I'm not gonna have you all do this, but in your own time, I want you to think about, was there a time when you realized you had a bias like I did? And how did you respond? how did you try to overcome that? Because that was powerful for me, because what I saw after I really started trying to put it together, I saw a shift in the way that I related to men in my professional life and in my personal life. I saw a shift, and it was really good for me, really, really good for me. So I encourage you all to do that. I went on, I'm not going to give you a lot of details, but I went on to do a lot of training for fatherhood practitioners. I worked with a lot of caring men, and nationally there was the Ford Foundation got real involved in fatherhood programs, and this guy Ron Mincy, who was one of my heroes, he coined that phrase, fragile families, because what we realized was these young men are involved in their children's lives at the time that the child is born, but what a lot of the barriers kind of push them away over time. So Ron said, it isn't a single parent family, it's a fragile family, that has these young men involved. So there are lots of different programs that try to nurture that fragile family. I've worked with Building Strong Families. More recently, I've worked with another hero in Baltimore, Joe Jones. He is the CEO of a company, the Center for Urban Families. One of the high points of all that work, I got to go to Cape Town, South Africa, and facilitate a cultural exchange summit. And the whole point was, right after apartheid, the idea was, now you guys have a lot of issues with poverty. Please don't do what we did in the United States, where when we came to figuring out what to do with poverty, we focused only on women and children and pushed men out. We want you all to really think about how can men be a part of the solution as you begin to try to reduce poverty. It was fabulous. Some pictures from that whole experience. It was really great. Okay, moving on. The guidelines for comprehensive sexuality. I was fortunate enough to be one of 20 people who worked on a national task force to try to, identify guidelines for comprehensive sexuality education. Finally, my dream. Not prevention, but proactive sexuality education. It was so wonderful, wasn't it, Deborah? It was. And we, one of our tasks was, okay, imagine an adult, a sexually healthy adult. What are the life behaviors of a sexually healthy adult? All those deliberations were just really great. And then what do they need, what's the knowledge, attitudes, and skills that they need to have? And what would it look like at all these different grade levels? And what are the core content areas? So we did all of that. And then my dream was, do I get to write a program based on it? And I did. Because the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ, they wanted to revise their About Your Sexuality curriculum. They asked for proposals, and I proposed to develop a curriculum based on the guidelines for comprehensive sexuality, and they accepted that. So I worked for the development process. It was a 6-year development process. It was magical. This was the first time in my career that I was working with folks that I didn't have to say, we really need to focus on this population. I'm like, push. Here it's like, bring it on. We are ready. We want to be totally inclusive. One of the big, strong values of OWL is what? Justice and inclusivity, right? So it was a phenomenal experience. So in 2000, the first edition was published, and then in 2014, it was revised with input from a lot of fabulous sex educators, some of whom were here earlier, like Al Vernacchio. So it's a rich and inclusive curriculum that has a lot of input from other people. And after the first edition was published, Wayne and I got to go out and do training of trainers all around the country. I think that Dallas workshop was one of those trainings, right? Okay, so I'm not going to spend time on this, but more recently I have, I got to work with one of the great people in evidence-based curricula, Dr. Loretta Sweet Jamaat, and I adapted her Making Proud Choices curriculum for youth and out-of-home care. And that was really, I see some applause. Okay, so that was really a wonderful experience. The next thing I'm going to be doing is working on older wiser, sexually smarter. I'm going to get to work with the fabulous Peggy Brick and Bill Taverner and Karen Rain. And as I leave, I want you all, and how am I doing time-wise? Is it?
You're a little over, but the chairs want to yield as much time as you need.
Okay. So just to wrap up, I want to just ask if anybody has like just a really exciting idea. If you were working with older adults, what topic or content or activity would you think would be most important so that older adults could feel comfortable and confident with their sexuality? I want that comfortable and confidence. So your hand first. Yes.
So this morning I attended a workshop by Kira Stein.
Okay.
Did I say her name right? And she included dance. And so I think that dance should be included in anything
dance.
that adults do together.
Okay. Is somebody making some noise? Oh, it's on tape. Perfect. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Reframing the concept and the content of sexual pleasure beyond the very stereotypical orgasm focus.
Yes. More sensuality.
Yes, and finding pleasure beyond the general understanding of the orgasm and having an orgasm-centered sexual experience.
Others. Thank you. Yes.
New and old fantasies and exploring things that maybe you've been thinking about for the last 50 years but not have done.
I missed the first.
Exploring new and old fantasies.
Yes.
I think recognizing and discussing and unpacking some of the things that if you're 80 years old you have gone through in terms of sexual revolution, in terms of if you were LGBTQ, what happened during your lifetime, and talking about it as a group and kind of deconstructing that stuff you've absorbed over your lifetime.
Great. Okay, last three. Nice little facilitation technique, okay? That's it, okay.
One of the things we run across working with older populations is how to get back into the game, how to get back into the dating pool. It's a whole nother system, especially after being in a monogamous relationship for decades.
Yes.
How do you get back into it by meeting new people and dating again? And what are the rules for that? It's a whole different ballgame.
Yes.
In a long-term relationship, how do you communicate to your partner that you want to reframe the relationship and put sex back in or in another way?
Okay. Yes. Last word, Wayne.
Launching off from Dr. Ruth, how to select the proper vibrator.
Yeah. That's such a great thing to end on. Okay. You know, I just need to say in closing that it has been a great privilege to be a sexuality educator all of these years. I look forward to more of the same for more years to come, but it's also been a privilege to share my story with you. So thank you so much.